Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of our Lord Almighty, the most gracious, the most merciful. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you all. It's indeed a great pleasure to be here today, and my thanks and gratitude go to the two esteemed centers who have organized this evening and allowed me the honor to be amongst you this evening. Let me tell you first, I think the very first thing that I should mention is my organization, the Cordoba Foundation. And I think I'd like to start by talking a little bit about why it is that the Cordoba Foundation came into being in January 2005, just a few weeks actually after the tsunami. The Cordoba Foundation came as a result of an idea and an internal struggle within myself, trying to ascertain exactly what it is that people respond to. How do people react to news, to statements, to positions? Why it is that sometimes we find that people in positions of power particularly, and bear in mind the context, at the time we were still fresh after the war, invasion and occupation of Iraq. Afghanistan was still fresh from the occupation of the American forces. And it seemed that war and occupation and invasion were going to be the name of the game for the foreseeable future. So the question was that why is it that people in offices of power choose to take the option which ultimately leads to people losing their lives, to innocent people suffering, to nations buckling under the weight of injustice, freedoms being ridden and curtailed, and oppression being exercised and practiced? Why is that? When I meet people face to face, when we have one-to-one meetings, members of parliament, people who have political clout, people who have positions of authority, they seem all to be nice people. So what goes wrong when the time comes and they have to make a collective decision that impacts on national politics and stands vis-a-vis other nations and countries? How is it possible that out of all the good people that I know in Westminster, in the Houses of Parliament, most of whom are extremely good and sincere people, how is it that from those corridors we had the decision to go to that catastrophic venture of invading and occupying Iraq? And from that question, the Cordoba Foundation was born. The Cordoba Foundation essentially was found to counter and to confound the theory that various civilizations and cultures are on an inevitable collision course, that ultimately people cannot live with other people. People who belong to a particular culture, who belong to a particular faith, cannot live side by side, coexist, tolerate, be peaceful with people who belong to another. That was the theory. And when Samuel Huntington proposed his theory, essentially he was pointing to the Muslims and the Muslim world in general, and the Muslim movements that represented the political aspirations of the Muslim people in various places. At the time of this theory being presented, which was in the early to mid-90s, that theory was really not given or did not attract the kind of attention that its author wanted. Most people back then, bear in mind, we were still to have the initiation and the dawn of the war on terror. And therefore, most people didn't really buy into that particular theory. Most people could speak of evidence to the contrary, to the fact that actually Muslims in the United States, in Western Europe, in the Southern Hemisphere, if you wish, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, were living side by side actually quite fine and quite peacefully with their friends, neighbors, relatives from various other faiths and cultures. So at that time, no one really picked up on that theory. However, once those planes lunged into the Twin Towers, everything changed. And people started, within a matter of minutes, reverting to that theory of is it inevitable that people who belong to the Muslim faith and the Muslim culture it's impossible to actually live side by side with them, or it's impossible for them to live side by side with people of any other denomination. That was essentially what the Cordoba Foundation came to address, to study, to analyze, and to try to prove entirely wrong. And hence the name Cordoba. Cordoba, that European, if you like, Western city, which bore one of the greatest civilizations, one of the greatest centuries in European memory, in which people of various faiths lived side by side. Now, during the 90s in the UK, a concept started sweeping through the public dominant narrative, and that is political correctness. All of a sudden, the Brits realized that they were, had racist tendencies and they needed to curtail that. They sort of spoke about others in particular terms and they needed to curtail, that particular language. So we initiated the era of political correctness. You'll excuse me if I say it's nothing more than wishy-washy talk that really meant nothing whatsoever. It just makes people feel good about themselves, that they're doing the right thing. But one word that was born out of this political correctness era was tolerance. Tolerance. And every government department, every hospital, every institution that belonged to the establishment had to use the word tolerance in its material in order to prove that it had moved away from the time of xenophobia, of racism, of isolationist sort of attitudes and the such. Tolerance became the name of the game. I, as a linguist, I'm quite pedantic when it comes to words. And I recall examining and studying the word tolerance. And tolerance, if you were to refer to the Oxford Dictionary, means to suffer the existence of. Meaning, you have a noisy, annoying neighbor who lives next door. You tolerate them, meaning they're a nuisance, they are annoying, you hate them, but you're quiet about it, and you're polite about it. You suffer their existence, but deep inside you'd rather they weren't there. If given the choice, you'd rather have, that neighbor just up sticks and moves somewhere else, and you have another. That's tolerance. And I started giving talks and speeches and addressing council meetings and the such, saying, are you serious? Is this the best that we can do? That we suffer the existence of others? That we treat each other as though we are noisy neighbors where we have no choice but to keep quiet and keep polite, but hope that one day you are no more? Is that the best that we can actually do? Because if that is it, that is extremely disappointing. And coming back to Cordoba, coming back to that particular time, the 100 years which the Spanish till this day call the 100 golden years, people not only coexisted and tolerated each other, but actually they managed in that environment of mutual respect and celebration of others' differences and variances, they managed to create one of the greatest civilizations of modern Europe, to which, till this day, millions, tens of millions of tourists flock to see the remnants of, in which the governor who belonged to one faith and one culture would have as his senior advisor someone who belonged to another, and one of his ministers belonging to another, and his best friends and companions in his courts belonging to another. And therefore, it's not just a dream or an aspiration or a wish that we have, that we can do this. It's through actual times, eras, and the lives of generations which actually prove to us that it's possible, it's doable. And therefore, from a long time ago, but manifested maybe, if you like, within the structure and the entity called the Cordoba Foundation, propose that human beings are far more capable of far better than mere tolerance than we give them credit for. That human beings have proven over time that actually by understanding that the variety and diversity which our Creator, our Lord, made us be, through that diversity and difference, we have a richness and wealth that is very rare indeed and very unique indeed. Imagine how bland life would be without the colors, the shapes, the voices, the sounds, the cuisines, the dresses, the ways in which people turn to their Lord and worship and be thankful for their existence. Imagine how bland life would be without that diversity. And I come to question this. You see, as I'm kindly introduced, I was born in Iraq, and I'm pretty sure that most of you who follow world events will realize that Iraq, since the invasion and occupation, has become a real mess. And I'm often called and summoned to various parliaments throughout Europe and sometimes to Congress in America in order to present the latest on Iraq and maybe present some ways out of the quagmire. And I'm often baffled by how my own government, the United Kingdom, as well as when I travel across Europe and America, I'm told, well, one of the challenges of Iraq and one of the difficulties is the demographic makeup. The fact that Iraq is split and the Iraqi people are split along sectarian, religious, as well as ethnic lines. And this baffles me. Why? Because this concept is born out of the old colonial narrative and mindset. You see, in Britain, and for the past 12, 14 years, in London, there is a concept that is celebrated, and that concept is multiculturalism. We celebrate the fact that in London, we have every single language spoken throughout the world, spoken in London. We have every single faith and religion practiced around the world, done so in London. We have virtually every single ethnicity, every single culture present in London, and we celebrate that. It makes good news. It makes good financial gains as well. It's a good business to have. And therefore, we constantly talk about how London, and in general the UK, celebrates its multiculturalism, the fact that it's multi-faith, multi-ethnic. We celebrate that. So why is it possible for London to be so varied, but because there are Sunnis and Shias and Christians and Muslims and Arabs and Kurds and Turkmens in Iraq, all of a sudden, life is unbearable? Why is that? Are the Iraqis, for some reason, somehow less capable of seeing that diversity is a source of richness? Is it possible that the Iraqis see this as a burden, whilst their counterparts in Britain see it as a source of wealth? Why is that so? Why is that so? The way in which we treat the issue of diversity needs to change. The mindset that creates the narratives that describe the way that people are so varied and different needs to be addressed and needs to be amended. Let me tell you this. I'm a Muslim. I happen to be from Arab heritage. I'm a man. I tend to support a football club, which I won't tell you because it's failing. I enjoy certain stuff. All this make up my multiple layers of identity. This is who I am. This is who everyone is. You favor a particular cuisine. I like a particular color. You're a family man. I'm someone who happens to be a professional in the world of finance. These are the multiple layers that make us. And to do with any one of those would be to take away from who you are as an individual. But guess what? You and I and everyone else share a layer that no one can deny. And that layer is before being a man, before being a human being, before being a Muslim, before being Iraqi, I'm a human being. And it is that essence, that essential description, which is something that we all share. And therefore, what I would suggest is that amongst all the challenges that we face, and we face as a human race and countries and societies around the world, we face a long list of challenges. And they vary in nature. Some of them political, some of them security, some of them economic, financial, some of them educational, some of them health, some of them about poverty, some of them... We have all these challenges facing us. But the essential challenge that we all face together is that search for our essential humanity. Because that is what defines us. I could never have been a Muslim if I had not been a human being. I would never have been a man had I not been a human being. It's our essential humanity that we all share. And in times of conflict, and in order to market and to promote and to propagate conflict and war, I need my constituents, whose taxes will fund my campaign, to buy into the idea that my enemy is their enemy, and that that enemy doesn't have that essential element of humanity, is somehow subhuman. Once you see the other as anything less than human, that person becomes fair play. It becomes easier to abuse. It becomes easier to target, to oppress, to deal wrongly with that particular person simply because they do not belong to the essential race that I belong to. And there are many things that we can say about this, but let me mention just a couple of things. You will have noticed how in the cases, and I'll continue on this, the cases of the American invasion and occupation of Iraq, when a suspect is detained, the very first thing the Marines or the Special Forces do is cover their heads, usually with black sacks or bags or whatever. They cover their heads. And whilst the main reason for doing this is essentially to disorient that person so that they become more under control and more manageable, but there is also a very important reason for that to happen. You see, if you want to look at anyone's humanity, you look deep into their eyes. You look deep into their eyes. That's why the very first point of contact between human beings is them seeing each other, looking into each other's eyes. That's how we define ourselves. Before I introduce myself as being Anas, and you introduce yourself by your name, we introduce ourselves as human beings. Once that contact is taken away, the question of that person's humanity becomes up for grabs. It becomes questionable. It becomes far easier to abuse, to oppress that person if I don't see their face and don't look into their eyes. I'll go a step further. I am in the business, as also introduced, of hostage negotiating. One of the very first lessons taught to special forces and Marines and soldiers around the world when they get captured is to shout out their name and their rank. To shout out their name and their rank. It's telling your captors that you're a human being. Your name is such and such. And you are a man or a woman. You are a human being. It becomes far more difficult in that case for the others, your captors, to treat you as anything less. The issue of our humanity is essential if we wish to eradicate conflict. In order for us to see the other as a human being before all the other labels that make them different from us, we must seek together to establish that fair, level playing field of all of us being human beings. We can talk about our differences for hours on end. We can talk about our political views for hours on end. We can talk about how we differ from each other for hours on end. And we can create, from those discussions, we can create reasons and justifications for conflict and for bloodshed. So it's the search for the essential me and you, for the essential me and the other, we and the other. That is the real challenge of humanity today, of human beings today. When I talk to kidnappers, try to talk them into releasing their hostages, the very first thing I tell them is that this is a human being, just like you. He's a man, just like you. Till now, by the grace of God, I still haven't negotiated the release of a woman. I hope that never happens. But the first thing I say, this is a man. His name is so-and-so. He has a family. His mother is worried about him. His children cry every night because he's not with them. Trying to establish that link between those kidnappers, regardless of their political views, regardless of their faith, regardless of their ethnic strife and difficulty and disagreements and grievances with that person or who he belongs to, that establishment of the human link is essential for any talks to then continue. And that needs to be preserved. Until now, by the grace of God, alhamdulillah, it's never failed. It's never failed. Every single person I've gone after has been released and returned to their families as a result. And you know what this taught me also? That those kidnappers aren't themselves evil. They're not evil per se. They weren't born evil. They live in certain conditions. They may have erred, they may have made great mistakes, they may have even committed crimes. But I am still to come across anyone, despite how much I disagree with them, despite how much I loathe what they do, despite how much I disagree and differ with their set of politics and the way that they pursue their politics, I am yet to find someone who is beyond human compassion. I'm yet to find that person who is utter evil, who cannot feel within himself an iota of compassion for humanity. I'm yet to find that person, and I hope I never do. What does that say? Coming back to the essential question, what does that say about human beings? Those that make decisions that culminate in such tragedies such as Iraq, those that do things like kidnapping people, taking away their freedoms and their liberties for either money or political gain. What does that say about when ultimately none of them deserve the label evil? When every single one of them, you can reach into their hearts, look into their eyes and find that trace of humanity. It simply means that anything and everything is possible. There is nothing beyond our reach. It means that whatever conflict there is a conflict that we create because we choose to create it. It means that whatever war we fight is a war we fight because we choose to fight it. That whatever blood we spill it because we choose to spill it. And if we willed and we wished and we wanted and we desired not to, it wouldn't happen. And that goes for the so-called inevitable clash of civilizations. There is no such inevitability. It's not inevitable at all. It becomes inevitable when we work at it, when we act it out, when we push for it, when we promote it, when we find certain details and press on certain differences that make it justifiable, inevitable, and necessary. But actually, it's none of those. It's none of those. Human beings' natural reaction is to actually find affinity in one another, is to build something together, is to create something together. And when we talk about the construct of peace, in general terms, we talk about peace building, because it is a construct. It is something that people need to come together in order to construct. An agreement that within our unique sets of respective characteristics and diversities and the such, we can come and build something absolutely magnificent. My dear friends, The world today is a very, very difficult world indeed. And the challenges that we face are immensely difficult. And I have to say this, and without pointing fingers or naming names, but governments don't solve problems. Governments don't solve problems. Believe you me, I know, because I'm often brought in by governments, east and west, south and north, in order to advise them on how to solve problems. And believe you me, on the many occasions that I've traveled and met with ministers and foreign officers and interior ministries and security departments and the such, and looked at what they have already done, I have seldom come across something and said, you know, you're really doing well. I have never done that. Never. Whenever I come across an authority trying to do something or solve a problem, I always see an utter mess. And the reason for this is quite simple. Because usually governments approach things with a short-term vision. For instance, in the case of the UK, I mean, this poor government, it's up for grabs in the next 18 months. It'll have to go to the people and it'll be subject to an election. And therefore, it can't afford to put in place long-term policies that might be unpopular. Popularity is the name of the game. Short-termism is the name of the game. And nothing of the challenges that we face as humanity and human beings today can be solved through short-term, narrow-minded, populist policies. And that's why the solution to our problems as people around the world, whatever they may be, you name a problem, and I'm telling you that the solution lies with the people. We have to rely on ourselves. We have to rely as nations, as peoples, to go beyond the divisions that certain power-based and interest-based entities throughout the world try to read the human map. We have to go beyond that and to try to reach into the humanity of ourselves and the humanity of others to overcome the problems that we face. Whether it be commercial, whether it be political, whether it be about security, whether it be about poverty or disease, whether it be about isolationist policies, racism or the such, all this can be treated by people coming together, understanding each other, proposing a different set of narratives, saying we will not listen to government statements that try to divide, create fear, instill insecurity and instability in us so that something along their agendas may happen. We won't even listen to media simply because, and I'll give you an example from a discussion that I had only a few days ago, when I said to someone, listen, why didn't you cover this particular story? This is a lovely story. He said, Anas, you know and I know that these kinds of stories about people coming together and peace and love and compassion, they don't sell papers. What sells papers is a headline that says there's a crazy maniac who wants to kill us all. That's what people will go for and buy. And that's the news that unfortunately most of our media are after. It's that sensationalism that creates interest that then bears financial gain. We have to go beyond that. And we have to return to our basic instincts. What did our parents teach us? What do we teach our children about decency, about fair play, about being truthful, about being sincere, about the pursuit of knowledge? Find out the facts first before you act. Not fighting for your rights, but actually speaking logically, intelligently, and intellectually, acting morally. All these things. Why is it that when we grow up and gain an experience, we lose sight of all these things? Why is that? So we need to return to basics, and we need to recapture that essential element, which is our humanity. By that, I assure you, and from experience, no problem is unsurmountable. No challenge is too difficult to overcome. No problem is beyond our solution. But finally, it's absolutely vital that this clash, this perceived hatred, this dynamic that creates so much violence and insecurity, it's all a figment of our imagination, and we need to overcome it. Our humanity is what joins us. Let's celebrate that. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Knowledge Box, the value-based media network.